Thank you very much indeed, Steve, and it is a great pleasure to be here with UUK at your conference. And we have just heard an eloquent case for universities. And Steve, as always, you marshalled your evidence effectively and spoke on behalf of the whole sector. All of us who care about higher education owe a debt to you and to Nicola and the whole team at UUK for the excellent work that you do. And you're absolutely right about the crucial role of universities in our economy. And their contribution extends beyond economic growth. Universities transform lives for the better, especially of young people. They're a force for good. They help people appreciate what Matthew Arnold called the best that has been thought and said in the world. For many young people, going to university is their route to adulthood and a different, better life. One of the great privileges of my job is visiting universities and seeing those notice boards with posters for visiting lecturers, sports competitions, new bands, or chamber concerts. They're a kind of vision of the ideal community. And I was, of course, visiting universities for years as part of my role in the Shadow Cabinet. I've addressed this conference, indeed, before as the opposition spokesman. But this time, it is different. And as you rightly argued in your speech, Steve, there are new and heavier responsibilities on my shoulders. And they're all the more serious because of the challenges facing the sector. I want to describe them frankly to you today, though you will understand that I cannot today set out the final decisions that the coalition government will reach. We have to wait for Lord Brown's review and for the conclusions of the comprehensive spending review. Rather a lot to wait for. But I can today share with you the thinking of Vince and myself as we approach these difficult decisions together. I can also assure you that at every meeting and discussion on these difficult issues, I try to draw on the wisdom of the many people I have met or corresponded with in higher education. There is much to learn from points that have been made to me in students' unions or in vice-chancellors' offices, as well as from the different mission groups, each of which have their own distinctive expertise. And I recognise and salute the fact that many parts of the HE sector work well. We do not wish to disrupt them. It will not be change just for the sake of change, or just to be different from the previous government. And look at some of the institutions that already serve the sector as a whole well. First, UCAS. It has faced unprecedented challenges this year, with another big increase in the number of applications, and individual applicants have had all the stresses and strains of desperately competing for university place. But at least these have not been exacerbated by the failure of UCAS as a system. It belongs to all of the universities, and you can be proud of the service it delivers. And here are the latest figures. 463,000 have now accepted a place. That is 11,000 more than at this stage last year. 38,000 prospective students have found a place through clearing. Although going to university is a competitive process, we will have more students at university this autumn than ever before. But there are new challenges for UCAS in the future. At the moment, part-time students are not part of this system. Can we do more to incorporate them? Can we do more with the data UCAS has on student choices, especially if we could link it with school data records, because then we'd be able to track the routes that people take through the education system and identify, for example, the young people who are not going to the type of universities they could be aiming for, and then we could give them better advice. I'm particularly keen to do everything possible to identify and encourage the so-called missing 3,000 teenagers who get good qualifications, often from poorly performing schools, but do not go on to our most competitive universities. And by using school and UCAS data, we might be able to do so. That's why I have asked Mary Kernock-Cook and UCAS if she would pursue this, and I appreciate her personal commitment to doing so. The Student Loans Company is another institution serving the sector as a whole. Its performance last year was unacceptable. Many thousands of students started university a year ago in real distress because of the appalling service they received. Coming in as a new minister and consulting with stakeholders, I concluded that a change in leadership at the top was necessary. And this year, the loans company performance has been much better. There are still problems, but the management has turned things round. And again, let me give you the latest figures out today. 682,000 applications, that is 75% of the total submitted, have now been prepared for payment. 191,000 applications, that's 21% of the total submitted, are still waiting for students or their parents to send in further evidence or return their signed acceptance form. So there is still more to do, but they are on track. And nor should we forget other institutions that play their part in the sector as a whole, notably HEFCE, and Steve spoke eloquently about HEFCE, and we recognise its distinctive contribution under the experienced and skillful leadership of Alan Langlands. Steve's speech set out the economic case for universities. The mantle of Beaverbrook fell on his shoulders as he argued that cutting universities would be like cutting Spitfires during the Blitz. But you know that the backdrop that we face today is not a military crisis, but a fiscal one, and it has to be fought with vigour. Whichever party had won the last election, there would have been cuts. Indeed, the last government left us with £600 million of cuts in universities and research, with precious little detail on how to deliver them. So yes, cuts are coming. And yes, sadly, there will be some pain. But if we are smart and courageous and work together, I believe we can emerge with a stronger and better sector. And let me take you through the thought process Vince and I have gone through over the past few months. There are three main options which form, if you like, an iron triangle that is the framework for our funding decisions. You either cut the unit of resource per student, or you reduce the number of students going to university, or you expect graduates to pay a greater contribution to their education once they are earning. Let's examine each in turn. The first option is to reduce the unit of spending per student. My party is associated with big reductions in resource per student as student numbers expanded in the early 1990s. It is still remembered as a time when investment in the resources needed to educate students properly was cut back too much. No one wishes to go through that again. But we must look at using public money that goes to universities with the greatest possible efficiency. So, for example, it really has taken too long to get to grips with the cost of pensions. It's a classic example of a problem swept under the carpet in the years of plenty, which we now have to tackle. In the past, you may have felt isolated as you tried to get the finances of university pensions on an even keel, but now the challenge is being grasped right across the public and private sectors. University staff do need to make a fair contribution to the cost of the pensions they are promised. Neither taxpayers nor students and their families should be expected to pay for the cost of pensions far more generous than most of them will enjoy themselves. Another example is increased sharing of back office services. Too many universities still try to do too much in-house. Again, I recognise that this is not all the fault of universities themselves. There is a real problem with VAT, with the VAT regime, which imposes extra costs on the sharing of services. It would be great to resolve this, but we cannot bank on it. So meanwhile, we're going to have to be smart at finding ways round the problem, and that is beginning to happen. The shared services pilot should increase sharing of services and contracting out of work despite the VAT problem. UPP have explained to me how universities might outsource provision of non-core services without creating a new VAT liability. They have proposed the establishment of joint ventures between universities and private service providers. The universities would have a majority stake. The joint venture would therefore be in the same VAT group. Another idea worth exploring. One service in particular lends itself to savings by sharing: procurement. Collectively, universities spend around £9 billion annually on non-paid costs, including procuring goods and services. Universities can save on that by acting in concert. And I welcome HEFCI's recent proposals here and urge universities to considering entering e-marketplaces like Zanzibar or, for more specific services, Science Warehouse. The potential savings are very large indeed. There are other ways of cutting overhead costs. In 2009, the number of senior university managers rose by 6% to 14,250, while the number of university professors fell by 4% to 15,530. On that trend, the number of senior managers could have overtaken the number of professors this year. I recognise that universities are big, complex institutions with revenues from many sources which need to be professionally managed. But we owe it to the taxpayer and the student to hold down these costs. We are now in a different and much more austere world. Again, we are not going to shirk our share of responsibility for tackling this. We will do away with unnecessary burdens upon you that require the recruitment of more administrators. Do tell me, and HEFCI of course, of any information, requirement or regulation which you believe comes at a disproportionate cost. They have to go, we cannot afford them. So this is the moment to be thinking even more creatively about cost cutting, and I congratulate you on your initiative inviting Ian Diamond to chair a UUK group on efficiency savings. You're right to get to grips with this, and we can work with you on this agenda without getting sucked into micromanaging our universities. There's no returning to a time, this is a century ago actually, when one Vice-Chancellor reacted to a Board of Education demand for figures on staff teaching hours by complaining, and I quote, "Nothing so ungentlemanly has done by the government since they actually insisted on knowing what time Foreign Office clerks arrive at Whitehall." Now, the second option is to cut student numbers. But we must not forget the many thousands of young people who aspire to go to university but cannot find a place. Arbitrary participation targets have been a distraction from what matters, which is making sure that applicants can get to the institution that's best suited for them, irrespective of their background. But it is also clear from the OECD evidence, which you rightly cited, Steve, that there is a strong international trend for more people to go to university. Average OECD net entry rates increased from 40% in 2000 to 57% in 2008, with the UK's rates increasing from 48% to 57% in the same period. So every country that has submitted data between 1995, when this data was first collected, and 2008 has increased their net entry rates over this period. We've clearly got a strong international trend here of more young people going to university. What matters is that, as well as the choice to attend university, people have other choices too. On A-level results day at UCAS, I listened to young people who had phoned in, fearful that their life chances had been wrecked because they hadn't got a place at university. But they need to be confident that there are other options as well. We cannot have a society where university is the only route to a well-paid job and a career. That is bad for social mobility, and it's why we're committed to ensuring young people have a wider range of options to choose from. Apprenticeships, places at FE college, part-time study, online learning, an ordinary degree first and then honours, and not necessarily at 18 either. The bottom line is more options and better advice. I'm committed to improving the information available to prospective students and their parents. Recently published research commissioned by HEFCI has identified information that students say they want, and a consultation in the autumn will figure out how best to make that information available. It's in everyone's interest that students make well-informed decisions about what and where to study. Most young people say they do not regret their decision to go to university, but over a quarter of them say they do wish they'd chosen a different course. And this tells me that once again, we need to do better on careers advice and information. One argument that's sometimes put for cutting student numbers is that the graduate premium has fallen, and this is evidence of a big increase in the number of students relative to demand. But Aditya Chakraborty was wrong in The Guardian the other day when he claimed that the premium has fallen from £400,000 to £100,000. Now let me just take you through this briefly. The graduate premium, as you know, is an indication of how much more someone with a degree earns over their lifetime, on average, compared with someone who finishes their education with 2 or more A-levels, i.e. with university entrance qualifications. The latest estimates for the graduate premium are based on improved methodology that takes account of tax, future earnings growth, and other factors. The premium is only an average, not a perfect measure, but it is a good measure. There was an early calculation of the lifetime earnings benefit of having a degree about 10 years ago within the then DFE, which produced an estimate of around £400,000, and this figure did gain some coverage at the time. However, this was not using the methodology I have just outlined. The 400,000 to 100,000 claim is therefore factually wrong, as it is not comparing like with like. In fact, both government-commissioned and external studies have consistently found that over his or her working life, the average graduate will earn comfortably over £100,000 more in today's valuation, net of tax, than a similar individual who achieved university entrance qualifications but did not go into HE. And they have shown that the premium has held up despite the recession. And it's not just an economic premium. Graduates are, on average, more healthy, more active in the community, more likely to be engaged in the education of their children. The graduate premium evidence further suggests, however, that it's not unreasonable to expect graduates to make more of a contribution themselves when they and after they have graduated, opening up the third option on my list. Once again, I'm not going to preempt Graham. You all know that he's looking at a range of possibilities in terms of graduate contributions, not, I stress, contributions from students at university. But I do believe that it is better for the younger generation to have the chance of going to university and then pay for it out of the higher earnings they achieve later on, rather than experiencing poorer quality HE or being deprived of the opportunity altogether. This has to make sense for young people. What would not make sense would be to fail to increase the contribution from graduates, with the result that we then jeopardized the student experience or ended up having to make big cuts in student numbers. That would be to let our young people down. So we start to see the road ahead. We do need efficiency savings, doing more for less. We do need to provide alternatives to university for the young people who aren't cut out for that ute. And we can expect graduates to contribute more. The challenge is to deliver all this. Steve fears what you call, Steve, a valley of death, inviting us perhaps to imagine vice-chancellors as the heroic cavalry in Tennyson's Charge of the Light Brigade. Cuts to the left of them, cuts to the right of them, into the valley of death charge the senior common room. I understand why he warns of the risks. But Vince and I are not going to abandon the careful and deliberative approach of the past few months. And let me share with you my thinking on how the process might work to try to tackle the concerns that Steve set out in your speech. John Brown has already said that he will report before the spending review, which falls on October the 20th. That will announce decisions about departmental budgets, which will have funding implications for higher education, and we'll probably have to move promptly on these. But funding is not the only issue to be resolved. The framework created by the Further and Higher Education Act 1992 will need re-examining on the position of non-publicly funded HE providers, the demarcation lines between FE and HE, on the role and powers of HEFCE, and other issues where the world looks very different from how it did 15 years ago. Those big questions will need thorough debate and consultation, with detailed government proposals to which experts from the sector can react, as it has done via the Brown process. We intend, therefore, to publish an HE white paper, leading, we hope, and subject to parliamentary time, to our higher education bill in autumn 2011. Implementation of reforms should start in the 2012-13 academic year. So be assured we will not drive through hastily conceived policies or tear down effective existing structures where they work well. I expressed my belief earlier that we can end up with a better sector and with stronger universities. It's always hard to look beyond immediate funding issues, but I do believe we can achieve this together. What might that better model look like? Fundamental to our vision is a renewed emphasis on teaching. Nothing matters more than passing on knowledge and sceptical understanding from one generation to the next. The Higher Education Academy has produced one of the most shocking reports I've come across recently. It is a survey of what gets you promoted as a university lecturer. Most of the academics felt that teaching is not rewarded in promotions as it should be. Fewer than 1 in 10 promotions in the Russell Group and the 94 Group were significantly influenced by teaching. Another recent survey showed that academics perceived research as most important for promotion, while teaching was barely on a par with administrative diligence. Universities that relegate the importance of teaching are in danger of losing sight of their original mission. Let's go back to John Henry Newman. After all, he is expected to be beatified very soon. And we do well to recall his idea of a university. And let me quote from the very first paragraph. He declares that a university, and I quote, is a place of teaching universal knowledge. This implies that its object is the diffusion and extension of knowledge rather than the advancement of it. If its object was scientific and philosophical discovery, I do not see why a university should have students. End of quote. Now, Newman's 150 years ago is clearly not the last word on the role of the universities, but it is a reminder of how ideas have moved on. I do think the balance between teaching and research has gone wrong. This is not because universities have suddenly made some terrible mistake. Theirs is a rational response to incentives created by successive governments. We have strengthened the incentives for everyone to carry out research with no change in the regime for teaching. It should be a source of pride for an institution to be an excellent teaching university. That is what most students rightly see as the backbone of their university experience. I know that this is something that people do care about and that good work is going on. For example, Janet Beer and Aaron Porter are jointly chairing a group who are developing guidance for university and higher education college charters. I've asked HEFGE to give the group all available support. But it remains hard to shift the impression that what really counts in higher education is research, and this does need to change. Of course, there's nothing to stop universities from granting professorships on the strength of excellent teaching. Some already do. Nor is there any obstacle to institutions rewarding good teaching in their pay and career progression frameworks. We've just got to do it. You can think as well about more widespread online publication of students' evaluations of teaching. Another way of empowering students and transforming the incentives to focus on teaching is by new institutions entering the sector which are devoted to teaching. There's nothing intrinsically better or worse about being a so-called private HEI. Indeed, every institution represented in this room is, in one sense, private. The UK has no public universities of the sort that exist in many countries, particularly in continental Europe. The government does not own any universities. It does not set pay, specify subjects to be taught, or appoint staff. Nevertheless, as a country, we have historically been nervous about HE institutions operating for a profit. Decisions taken decades ago by both government and universities have meant that the higher education scene in the UK is dominated by institutions that get a significant part of their income from government grants via funding councils. In exchange, they sign up to various conditions, mainly relating to quality, financial assurance, and the like. It's the traditional British way, an informal regulatory framework resting on the power over grants. Much of it you'd struggle to find set down in the 92 Act. But as we all know, the world is changing. Internationally, for-profit higher education providers are becoming more significant. They're a natural response to the global hunger for higher education and better qualifications. Unencumbered by the weight of history, these providers can grow quickly and change fast. They offer a salutary challenge and new approaches to delivering higher education efficiently and in turn cheaply for students. They may have ideas to contribute on student-centered teaching that everyone can learn from. That is, of course, why some institutions are already in partnership with such providers for particular ventures, especially those aimed at specialist professionals such as business schools. I hope your UUK will consider whether your own membership should be extended to cover private providers as well. The asset test for HE providers is whether they offer excellent teaching and a high-quality experience for students. You were right to set that test, Steve. If they can do that at a fair price, then it doesn't matter whether they're old universities or new, for profit or not for profit. They have something to contribute and should have the chance to do so. That is the case for a more open market. One way to open up the market, as I've argued previously, is for teaching institutions to set up and offer degrees set externally by the likes of the University of London. This supposedly radical model is actually how all English universities were created for a century, from the 1850s to the 1950s. There are vice-chancellors in this room whose universities received their own degree-awarding powers within living memory. I am not trying to take them away, but I do believe that the alternative model of teaching to an externally set degree deserves another chance. I have asked the QAA to look at any barriers or implicit assumptions within the quality regime that ties higher education to a model that requires institutions to award their own degrees. Any such assumptions should go. Very large numbers of students will want the traditional university model and what it offers. Fortunately, in a world where demand for higher education is growing, there is room for different models. Having stressed the importance of teaching, we must not overlook research. A strong research base is indeed vital for our future in a global knowledge economy. As Vince set out yesterday, strong in both fundamental curiosity-driven research and research applied to the challenges facing businesses and public services. Science and research are indeed the lifeblood of many sectors essential to growth and a rebalanced economy. We are fortunate that the UK remains first or second in the world at research in many disciplines despite growing international competition. The primary objective of public funding must be research excellence and international competitiveness. We will back outstanding individuals, but we also appreciate and will take into account the benefits of critical mass and multidisciplinary capacity. Public funding for university research will continue to be delivered through independent arm's-length bodies, including the national academies, which support outstanding individual scholars, and distributed on the basis of excellence determined by expert peer review and assessment. Both sides of the dual support are already highly selective on the basis of research excellence, and non-government funders of research, such as global businesses and charities, are just as sensitive to quality. These policies create the environment for a high-performing research base. In a more constrained funding environment, with international competition and collaboration growing, it is clear that we will need to focus on sustaining the national capability for the very best research. Such research not only pushes back the frontiers of knowledge, but supports growth in the economy by boosting the performance of business, producing highly skilled people, improving public services and policy making, and attracting R&D investment from global businesses. This may well mean higher concentration of public funding for research than we have to date, albeit confirming the direction of travel over recent years. Greater selectivity means that not every academic, department, or institution can necessarily expect to continue to receive public funding for research. HEIs, as autonomous institutions, should establish what is their core mission and the areas where they can make the most difference. But I'm well aware that the research ecosystem is complex and that the devil will be in the detail. BIS will work closely with HEFGE on this, and together we will be intelligent about how to go about achieving it. I also recognise the diversity of ways in which HEIs contribute to growth and well-being through knowledge transfer and exchange, improving the performance of existing companies and creating new ones, improving public services and inspiring the public. This contribution is far broader than research and must not be lost. So, Steve, you set out in your speech 8 points. Let me conclude by summarising mine with 8 particular points. First, a commitment to boosting social mobility by asking UCAS to work with schools and improving the data that we can use. Secondly, I've reported to this conference today a dramatic improvement in performance by the Student Loans Company. Thirdly, identified possible ways you can improve efficiency. Fourth, advocated a wider range of vocational and career routes for young people. Fifth, recognized that graduates, not students, but graduates, are likely to have to make a higher contribution to the university education they have received. Sixth, signalled the importance of teaching. 7, stressed the importance of a diverse range of higher education institutions. And 8th, confirmed the likely continuation of concentration of research funding. I very much look forward to working with UUK on this wide-ranging and ambitious agenda. Thank you very much indeed.